Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. I'm Jack and today, as you can see, I've got a bit of a fan favourite here for you guys. I am indeed revamping our Night March list just because there are a lot of really good cards for Night March, or a couple of really good cards for Night March in the new Breakpoint set. So we wanted to get a list to you guys as soon as possible so you guys could start testing with this new Night March list and can see how much potential new Night March had compared to old Night March. So we're going to jump straight into it, of course, with 4 of each of the Night Marches. They all kind of have their specific uses. Lampent is indeed the least useful, simply because we don't run Litwick, so these are just thrown straight in the discard, with things like Sycamore, Ultra Ball, and Battle Compressor, just to increase our damage count. Nothing really too much to say about the Lampents. The Joltiks have 30 HP, and for a DCE cost can use Night March, so it's the easier of the two attacks to set up, only requires a DCE. But obviously that 30 HP is kind of annoying. Things like Crobat and Greninja can actually one-snipe this mid-turn as well, which is really annoying. Joltik does indeed have weakness on things like Rayquaza, Mega Rayquaza, Yveltal, Baby Yveltal, so it does definitely have uses, but you depending on your matchup, you kind of have to choose which Night March you're going to go for. Pumpkaboo is the other attacker we have in the deck, having 60 HP rather than 30, so it's a little bit tankier, but actually costs 3 energy to use Night March rather than 2. Now, we do indeed run Dimension Valley, so we can often get this down to a DC cost, but it just means we need one more card to be able to do so. So Joltik is generally a little bit easier to set up, but as long as you've got a Dimension Valley in play, Joltik and Pumpkaboo have the exact same attack cost. Much like Joltik, he does have a weakness. He does have weaknesses on a couple of really nice Pokemon. Things like Lucario. If you can get rid of the Focus Sash with a Megaphone or a Xerosic or something, you can one-shot Lucario really easily. And Mega Mewtwo Y, which is really nice as well. So yeah, that's pretty standard. Everyone expected that. And of course, we are indeed playing 3 Shaymin as well. Shaymin is a really important card for the deck. Just first off, being able to use setup to run through our deck as quickly as possible and not use a supporter but still get through our deck is really strong. It also means we don't have to worry about looking for a supporter turn 1. We run very low supporters, but as long as we have an Ultra Ball, we have sort of a pseudo supporter at all times just in Shaymin. The other thing is, there's a couple of matchups that are really useful with Shaymin as well. The Night March Mirror is a lot easier when you have a Shaymin or two and you're able to bench them and take out Joltiks. Obviously, Sky Return does take out a Joltik for a DCE. It also bounces the energy back into your hand, and it also bounces an EX back into your hand, meaning that they're not favourably trading against your EXs, which is basically how Night March tries to win games. It tries to take prizes on 3 EXs rather than 6 non-EXs. So being able to take a Shaymin off the board against your opponent playing Night March means that they have to actually take 6 prizes on the Night Marches rather than getting away with just taking prizes on 3 Shaymins, things like that. The other useful matchup is when you're playing things like Toadtina with Sky Return. Obviously, if you Sky Return on their Toad, they don't stop the lock. They kind of have to stop their own lock to be able to stop you playing your DCEs back down. And in stopping one lock, they sort of set up another, but by stopping the item lock, we can use our items, use things like Xerosic and Hammers, or search out for things like Xerosic and Hammers to try and stop the lock altogether and get rid of some of their energy. It means we can Xerosic and via Secret back, and Xerosic to try and stop the Toad lock if it comes back in, and then use the single enhanced hammer we play, I'm going to talk about a little bit later on, to try and stop the lock altogether pretty much. So Shaymin is a really crucial card in that matchup as well. It means that we can stop their lock and still win the matchup relatively, not easily, but a lot nicer than you used to be able to when you didn't have Shaymin. Okay, sorry about that, guys. The camera cut out for some unknown reason. But yeah, next up we have 4 Battle Compressor. The 4 Battle Compressor are basically the core engine of the deck, being able to discard your Night Marches for more damage, discard a supporter to be able to then use it with VS Seeker later on, discard cards that you don't need for specific matchups, things like Enhanced Hammer that when you know your opponent isn't playing specials, things like that. Just getting rid of clunky cards that you're not going to use is really useful. Like we say, this is exactly how the deck runs, discarding your Night Marches, doing huge damage, discarding discarding consistency supporters to get them back, discarding your one-off supporters to get them back when you need them. It's just an overall consistency card, which is kind of the theme for the next few cards. Just to be able to up the consistency and get this turn 1 huge Night March if you're going second as often as possible. Next up, 4 Ultra Ball. Again, kind of expected. Ultra Balling to discard 2 cards and grab a Shaymin is really strong. Discarding 2 Lampent is really strong. Discarding 2 Night March in general is really strong. It's another card that can discard Night Marches from our hand rather than the deck, and still increase our consistency by grabbing a Shaymin or another Night Marcher to attack with this turn. Kind of expected, nothing really too special about running the 4 Ultra Ball. Next up, the first of the new cards. We are indeed playing 4 Puzzle of Time. As you can see, there's no more Milotic in the deck. Milotic was heavily featured in Night March for a little while, but Puzzle of Time is basically an item version of that, but even stronger than Milotic in a lot of cases. So if you play 1 Puzzle of Time down at once, you may rearrange the top 3 cards of your deck. Okay, that's kind of useful. Maybe you've got an Acro Bike that you don't want to get into 2 DCs with, things like that. Very, very niche plays. But if you play 2 Puzzle of Time at once, you may search your discard for 2 cards and put them into your hand. So this is Milotic's ability, but getting 2 cards, and it's a trainer, and you can use it turn 1. Which means the prospects for turn 1 Night March just kind of skyrocket, considering you can use 2 Puzzle of Time to get back compressors, to get back supporters, to get back Shaymins, things like that. There is so many uses for Puzzle of Time. Yeah, just getting, it's like there's even more outs to compressor, there's even more outs to things like, well, anything you need that's consistency wise. It makes getting the turn 1 Night March so much stronger than ever before, really, I think. And then late game, if you use them, you can get back your really techie supporters. Maybe you've had to discard a lot of your VS Seekers. Well, these kind of work as VS Seekers as well, which is really strong. So yeah, there's no real downsides other than the fact that you have to play 2 at once. But we're running through the deck so much, there's so many consistency cards that lower the deck size. We are going to be running into 2 Puzzle of Time at once very, very often compared to what you would initially think, just because in a 60 card deck it is more difficult than... It is potentially quite difficult, but with all of the consistency we have, we run through the deck so quickly it's not at all an issue. We do, of course, have 4 Trainers Mail and 3 Acro Bike. Again, real consistency cards. Trainers Mail letting you look for these really, really strong items early on, which is super strong. It means you have sort of not exactly a 56 card deck, but it does give you more outs to these trainers, so it's kind of like running 1 extra of each of the trainers in the amount of times you're going to be able to pick them up. And then the Acro Bikes, again, very similar. Sometimes even stronger than Trainers Mail, because you can discard a Night Marcher and take a DC for the attack, or something like that. Discard a Night Marcher, take a compressor, discard a Night Marcher, take the second Puzzle of Time you need, things like that. However, sometimes they can be really brutal. If you say get 2 DCEs, well, you have to get rid of a DCE, which is really rough. That being said, the discards are a lot less painful now we do have Puzzle of Time. Milotic kind of had to be used on DCEs just because of how rarely you could use it, it being an ability and only 1 card at a time, and it would take 2 turns to use. Now we have a more proactive sort of use with Puzzle of Time. We can be a little bit more aggressive, ever so slightly more aggressive with our discards, just to be able to hunt for these turn 1 knockouts, especially with being able to Puzzle of Time back into compressors turn 1 to get even more Night Marches into the discard. We can be a little bit more aggressive because the prospects for getting that turn 1 Night March knockout is really, really high at the moment, and it just means we don't have to worry too much about discarding all of our resources, just because we can get them back a lot easier. Next up we have 1 town map. The fact that you take prizes so quickly, you need to be able to chain knockouts, because without being able to chain knockouts, sometimes your opponent can kind of overrun you, especially if they can take more than 1 prize in a turn on your Night Marches, maybe taking a Joltik and a Pumpkaboo in the same turn, if they're playing things like Bats or Greninja. So taking town map to be able to consistently knock out your opponent turn after turn, getting the exact card you need is really, really strong. Also get some of the one-off supporters that we use that are kind of techie, to be able to get them back and not worry too much about discarding them or not drawing into them early enough, because you know you can get them later on in the game if they're in the prizes. We do of course have one Startling Megaphone. Megaphone gets a lot stronger now that Fighting Fury Belt is out. Fighting Fury Belt can really push us to be able to do one-shot knockouts, especially if it's on an EX, because it often pushes them up to Mega HP, which is it has always been more of an issue for Night March than just normal EX HP. We can do it, but it's not as nice. So Megaphone can sort of prevent that. Also, if you put like 180 on, say, a Darkrai and they've got a Fighting Fury Belt on, you can use the Startling Megaphone mid-turn to take 2 prizes as well. So Startling Megaphone is definitely really useful. Another thing it is useful for is Entei. Now, I would imagine Entei will probably start going down in play once Greninja gets sort of hyped and is played a lot. But for now, if people are still trying to use Entei, it does get rid of the Assault Vest, which again was always a bit of an issue, because this was a non-EX that gave up 1 prize, but had the HP of an EX Pokemon, so it's never a particularly favourable trade for us. We really have to work for the knockout, and we're only rewarded with 1 knockout, with 1 prize after that. So if anyone is still playing Entei in the next few weeks, it does help with that matchup, but I think Fighting Fury Belt, the hype around Fighting Fury Belt kind of justifies the Megaphone anyway. We have one Buddy Buddy Rescue. Buddy Buddy is kind of a really nice... Well, there's a couple of really nice plays we can make with it. It just, again, it ups the consistency. Maybe we have to really push for a knockout, discarding 1 more Night Marcher than we'd like to. Buddy Buddy Rescue does mean we can get it back and continue the knockouts next turn if we really had to push for a knockout. The other really cute play you can use is using Compressor to compress away a Shaymin and then Buddy Buddy Rescuing it back into your hand, which is really nice. We choose Buddy Buddy Rescue over Revive simply to be able to do that play to get Shaymins back, even not just that play, but to get Shaymins back as well. You could run Revive if you don't want your opponent to benefit from taking a Pokemon back from their discard, but it's kind of more personal preference. I think the Buddy Buddy Rescue play is slightly more favourable on your side of the field, because unless your opponent's running Buddy Buddy Rescue themselves, they didn't think the card was good enough to put in their deck anyway, so they're probably not crucially relying on that strategy. So it's never too much of a downside, I don't think. It obviously can be in certain situations, but that being said, I think we always benefit from it enough to sort of justify the card. As mentioned earlier on, we are indeed running one Enhanced Hammer. This is to slow things down and to break locks on Toad Tina, especially if we do use the Shaymin play to get them to go into Tina to stop us from using our own DCEs. We then have access to Enhanced Hammer and Xerosic, which I'm going to talk about in a bit, to be able to stop their lock and try and overrun them from there, really. So having one Enhanced Hammer as well as one Xerosic means we can get rid of 2 energy in a turn, which means they can't actually sort of keep attaching for the turn and keep up with us. If we can just get 1 turn of them missing some sort of energy, it does mean eventually they will run out of energy and we can come back in and start using Night March again, things like that. And finally, one Switch. Switch is just for convenience, really. We are indeed running a Floatstone in here, but having the option between using Switch and using Floatstone is really nice. If maybe we need to move something from the active that does indeed have a Fighting Fury Belt already attached to it, well, we can't use the Floatstone then, so we have to use the Switch. Just having the utility of both is really strong, and also gets you out of Lysander locks and Lysander stall plays that your opponent tries to do, just to slow you down, especially if the deck wants to take prizes as quickly as possible. You don't really want to slow down to try and, you don't really want to let your opponent slow you down, you want to keep the pressure on, so Switch helps you do that. I said finally, but of course we are running 4 VS Seeker, but it's kind of the norm, especially with Battle Compressor. Like I say, we only run 7 supporters, so being able to Battle Compressor them away, and then VS Seeker them in that same turn is really nice. And using VS Seekers later on as well is always really useful. So onto the supporters themselves, we are running 2 Professor Sycamore. You don't need 4 in the deck, I don't think, simply because there's so much consistency here, so much trainer draw here. You are going to deck yourself out if you keep running into these Sycamores. And you really don't want to do that, which is why we're only running 2. Again, with the amount of consistency, you are going to be running into a VS Seeker and a Battle Compressor turn 1 99% of the time, so that does mean you are going to run into a Sycamore 99% of the time if you need it. Other than that, it's just the best draw support in the game, so we all know how good Sycamore is. Next up, we do have 2 Hex Maniac. Hex Maniac has kind of a variety of uses. First up, things like Aegislash that try to lock us from using special energy, or that we can't do damage to because of special energy. If we can get a Hex Maniac and knock them out in a turn, we take 2 prizes on something that would usually cause more of an issue. Bats and Greninja obviously are incredibly useful in this format with dealing with Joltiks and Pumpkaboos now, since the Greninja break can one-shot a Pumpkaboo and the normal Greninja can one-shot a Joltik. So being able to stop them for a turn can sometimes lead to you sort of overpowering them and running away with the game from there. I do think the matchup is probably still quite hard, but having the 2 Hex Maniac is obviously really, really useful. And then whenever you have sort of the turn 1 knockout and you don't need to use Sycamore, if you manage to get it without using a supporter, Hex Maniac just is a really, really good sort of option to use on your opponent, just to try and stall them even more and carry on applying the pressure. They then can't bench Shaymins, they have to bench them for very low value, just to avoid you benching them. And any Shaymin you see is obviously really, really good, really, really good bait for you, because it's so easy to knock them out, especially with Joltik. You need like 3 night matches in the discard, so you really want to see things like that. So Hex is really, really useful. We've got 1 Lysander. Like I say, the deck likes to trade against EXs rather than non-EXs, so choosing your opponent's EXs rather than them throwing up non-EXs turn after turn to try and stall you out and make you take 6 knockouts. Being able to Lysander really means you can pick and choose where you take your prizes, and really, really speeds up the game, especially if they do have to bench things like Shaymin just for 1 or 2 cards just to try and stay in the game themselves. It really punishes plays like that. As mentioned before, Xerosic is really, really good against things like Toadina. Also really good with the new Fighting Fury Belt, another card that can lead to us knocking out a Pokemon mid-turn. If we've done 180 and they've got a Fighting Fury Belt, we can throw down a Xerosic and take the knockout mid-turn. Not quite as strong as Megaphone in that regard, because it means you are using a supporter to do so, so you can't then use Lysander to try and grab a Shaymin or something for 4 prizes in a turn, but it is another option to us. Also discard special energy again, stopping locks like Toadina. And finally, Focus Sash is a big thing. Focus Sash obviously stops us from one-shotting our opponents, so getting a Focus Sash off the active or off anything that we see, just to try and stop our opponent stalling us out at all, is really, really nice. It means that we don't have to worry about taking even more turns than we would usually have to. We can just take the prizes as turn after turn after turn and not worry about taking them as and when they come, especially if we're doing huge damage and then breaking the sash, and then they can attach another sash. Things like that are really annoying. So Xerosic helps with that. Also, I forgot to mention, really good with Night March as well, another card along with Shaymin that is incredibly useful in the Night March mirror, just to be able to slow your opponent down to the point where they maybe miss an attack, at which point you just go so far ahead they really struggle to get back, especially if you're using the Shaymin play to try and bounce your own Shaymins as well. Finally, we have 1 Teammates. Teammates has always been really, really good in Night March. Whenever you lose a Pokemon, which you're going to be doing quite frequently, just because of the low HP they have, you can then search for whatever you need. You can search for Night March DCE, Dimension Valley DCE, Time Puzzle, things like that. It's just so strong. Teammates is so useful, getting specific cards for matchups like Enhanced Hammer and Megaphone, or getting more consistency cards like the Puzzle of Time or the Ultra Ball, things like that. There's just so many uses to Teammates, especially as you are going to be going down pretty regularly. It does mean we can sort of up the consistency of the deck, which is really, really nice, especially like I say, as you are going to be going down relatively frequently. Onto the tools, we have 2 of the new Fighting Fury Belt. Unfortunately, I only own 1 at the moment. Yeah, Fighting Fury Belt means that we don't have to worry anywhere near as much about bats and Greninja. No bats will one-shot us just with a single bat drop if we have a Fighting Fury Belt on. Obviously, it pushes Joltik up to 70 HP and Pumpkaboo up to 100. So it does mean we have a lot more sort of resistance to things like the bats taking really cheap prizes. It also really helps with Baby Yveltal. Baby Yveltal is one of the real issues for this deck, considering it can one-shot Joltik just on damage, and then one-shot Pumpkaboo just on weakness, excuse me. Just on weakness. Having the Fighting Fury Belt on Pumpkaboo means they have to have the Muscle Band to knock us out, and having the Fighting Fury Belt on Joltik means they can't knock us out in one shot without some prior damage or using their second attack, which they don't want to be doing. So yeah, it makes things like that a lot more awkward, and obviously the extra 10 damage can be useful here and there. Being able to discard 8 Night Marches and then just attach for 170 on some EXs is really nice. But the 40 HP is one of the biggest benefits from this card, just because it makes the Yveltal maths so much more difficult for them, and the bat maths really horrible, unless they can get rid of these Fighting Fury Belts relatively quickly. We don't need more than 2 really, because you're running through the deck so fast, you are going to have enough damage to knock out your opponent, pretty much whatever your opponent plays, turn after turn, which means you don't always need the extra HP or the extra damage. But just having access to them in specific matchups, like bat matchups, and anything with Yveltal, things like that is really useful. Along with the switch, we are playing one Floatstone. Again, it's just another card to help us get out of the active spot. I'm going to throw it on a Shaymin, or yeah, pretty much just a Shaymin mainly, just to stop us from getting Lysander stalled or throwing something up after we've lost a knockout, and we have to throw something up that we want to attack with. This gives us so much more flexibility, which is really nice. You can even throw it on Joltiks and Pumpkaboos just to always have a free retreater as well. But with the one switch, it's less reliable. You're less reliant on searching for that one Floatstone as often as possible. Finally, for the trainers, we are indeed running 3-Dimension Valley, purely to be able to Night March just for a DCE with Pumpkaboo. We're running 3. The deck did run 2 for a while, but now Delinquent is in the format. It is definitely more important to play 3, just because there's another card along with more stadiums to get rid of the stadiums and sort of try and win the stadium war. So we do need a 3rd just to try and avoid losing the stadium war and always have access to Pumpkaboo. But yeah, there's no real reason to not run 3. I don't think. I think the deck probably has space just to run that 3rd, just to ensure it doesn't lose to delinquent decks, things like that. And of course, finally, for DCE, no real explanation needed. It's the deck's blood, being able to Sky Return in one turn just for 1 energy technically, and Night March for 1 energy is just far too strong. Obviously, things like Aegislash will always annoy you, but with the Hex and the VS Seekers and the Battle Compressors to be able to get into the VS Seekers and the Hex, it's just so much more useful. So we don't really need to run any special energy at anything other than the special energy at the moment, the DCEs. But obviously, as the format evolves, maybe it will turn out that we do want to play a different type of basic energy. But yeah, that's our list at the moment. I think Puzzle of Time is probably this is one of the decks that Puzzle of Time can really be abused in really well. Another of the decks is Sableye Garbodor, but that's another story for another day. Yeah, Puzzle of Time is just really strong. I think the fact that it can just search for Battle Compressors or get Battle Compressors off the discard to get even further, get that turn 180 is really strong. But then having access to your DCs like Milotic did, having access to technically being another 2 VS Seekers technically, or even more if you get 2 supporters back. There's just so much versatility with Puzzle of Time, and I think it really pushes Lampent Night March even further into the top tier. I think this deck is still going to be strong after Breakpoint is released. I think it may have a couple of new sort of matchup issues, but it may find out that it has some even better matchup, well, not issues, but even better matchups in the format to be able to sort of prey on and carry on doing really well against. We all know how good Night March is, so I don't really feel it needs to be justified all that much, but I do think it definitely gets better with this new set, purely because of Puzzle of Time and the Fighting Fury Belt getting rid of 2 real issues for Night March, being the Bats and the Yveltal. But yeah, that's the deck. It's a really consistent list. You are going to hit the 180 relatively consistently, and it's yeah, it's just so strong. So I definitely recommend you check it out. Relatively cheap deck as well. Obviously the Shaymins are quite pricey, but Shaymin is a worthwhile investment just because you're going to be running it in everything. So if you can manage to get some Shaymins, I would suggest you do so. And then the rest of the deck is relatively cheap. I think the next two most expensive cards are probably the VS-Seekers, the Battle Compressors, and maybe the Fighting Fury Belts, depending on how much they are on release. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. I've been Jack from Omnipoke. I hope you've enjoyed the list. If you have any comments on the lists, any questions about cards, anything we did or didn't include, or any specific deck lists you'd like to see over the next few days, please do let us know. We would love to hear your feedback. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in another video.